Good afternoon. Welcome to the Illinois edition of our state webinar series exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released report, Farms Under Threat, the State of the States. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics to make this a good experience. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section in the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square to the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel, allowing you to then type in a question or a comment. And we will have a couple of opportunities for Q&A in the middle and at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and we'll send the link to everybody who registered today. Please feel free to share the recording with others. So let me now start by introducing myself. I'm Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Chris Reynolds, AFT's Midwest Director. Chris is based in Central Illinois. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We began as and are still an agricultural land trust, but that is just one piece of our work. In the Midwest, we are deeply focused on giving farmers tools to improve soil health and water quality. We are also expanding programming around land access and farm transfer and succession. And our work with farmers informs our research and our state and federal policy development and advocacy. So let me now turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all of you for participating today. We are joined today by several valued partners here in Illinois. These include the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the Conservation Fund, the Wetlands Initiative, Illinois Stewardship Alliance, the Illinois Environmental Council, the University of Illinois, multiple Illinois land trusts and members of the Vital Lands Illinois Network, several farmers and farm managers from around the state, as well as the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we'd like to recognize and thank NRCS especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, the Conservation Science Partners. We also want to recognize one of our AFT board members based in Illinois, Lynn Clarkson with Clarkson Grain, and also give a special shout out to Ann Sorensen, AFT's Illinois-based senior research advisor who has been instrumental in our Farms Under Threat research. Farmland loss is a complex and multifaceted issue, and it's going to take a concerted and collaborative effort to respond effectively in Illinois. We're so glad that such a diverse group of stakeholders is able to be part of the conversation today.
Great, thanks, Chris. So let's now turn to the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today we're focusing on the State of the States, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach for State of the States that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch event last month, I want to touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equal to all the land planted in 2017 in the United States to fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. And in looking at the quality of the land converted, more than 1/3 of it, about 4.4 million acres, is land identified as nationally significant. This is land best suited for intensive food and crop production. And as you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the US, including the Midwest. Smaller cities, not just large ones, are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to dive into the data available for Illinois on our interactive website. This is a new website built just for this purpose. We will be ably assisted in our cruise through the website by our colleague and navigator, Beth Fraser. So thank you, Beth. And we're going to start with this reports and data tab over here on the right-hand side. This is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe our methodology. You'll find the full report. And if you look at geospatial data layers where Beth has her cursor, that is where, if you want access to the data layers that we used in this research, you can fill out a form that you'll find under that tab, and we will be back in touch with you to let you know what is available and when it will be available. So with that, now let's go to the drop-down menu and go to Illinois. And when you get there, you see that there's both spatial mapping and the policy scorecard. And we're going to start on the spatial side. And we're actually going to start with showing this download Illinois conversion summary. So for Illinois and for every other state, we created a 2-page PDF that we hope will be very useful to partners. It's got lots of great infographics. It's got all of the key information that we will be talking about. And best of all, you can download it if you don't have very strong Wi-Fi, which has been a challenge for many of us, we know. So we hope this is useful. It can be a tool, again, to give to policymakers, to give to reporters, to use with your members and constituencies. So we hope it's helpful. There's a different one that is a policy summary. We're not going to point about that, but just know that it's available. So now we're going to start with land cover and use. State of the States uses multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development, which is the land in the kind of burnt orange or the dark tan. I mean, I guess the red is urban, and that kind of burnt orangey color is low density residential development. This data layer also includes the first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm or ranch. Our mapping shows 27.3 million acres of agricultural land in Illinois, including 23.4 million acres of cropland, 2.2 million of pasture, and about 1.77 million acres of woodland associated with a farm. So now we're going to talk about PVR values. For farms under threat, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. Higher PVR values are the darker green. So the darker the green, the higher the value. And the higher the value, the higher the suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. We use these PVR values then to identify nationally significant land. And you can see there's a separate data layer here for that. This map shows those nationally significant agricultural land in Illinois. You'll see, perhaps not surprisingly, that 23 million acres fall into this category, which is 84% of the state's agricultural land base. Almost 22 million acres of this is cropland, with about 800,000 acres in pasture and 367,000 acres in woodland. And we talk about the conversion of these highly productive acres in terms of both their economic and environmental consequence. When land with high PVR values is impacted by development, intensive food production gets pushed to more marginal lands. And for farmers, this typically means higher input costs and or lower crop yields. And for the environment, this can lead to more soil erosion and impaired water quality. And so now let's look at conversion, our last data layer here. And again, when the mapping here is a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016. Again, a period of historically low housing starts with a deep recession in the middle. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land use, or UHD. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas, largely found in cities and towns. This category, though, also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well pads and solar panel installations. The second type of conversion is low-density residential development, or LDR. This is the first effort of its kind, again, to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. If you look closely at land we've characterized as LDR, there may be some active agriculture on it, and some of that small parcel production may be very productive and profitable. But we've learned from this analysis that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land that was in LDR in 2001 was 40 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who end up farming in and around non-farming neighbors. Total agricultural land converted in Illinois over this 15-year period was 244,300 acres. Cropland accounted for most of it, 170,700 acres, followed by pasture with 55,000 acres, followed by woodland with almost 19,000. I'll note that Illinois' conversion trend looks slightly different from the national trend in that the majority of conversion, 66% of it, over this time period was to urban and highly developed land. So less LDR land converted than to urban and highly developed land, but still quite a bit of low density residential land use as well. And lastly, looking at the quality of land converted, about 72% of it was land considered nationally significant. So with that, let me now turn it over to Chris, who with Beth's help is going to navigate through this a little bit more and look again at some development trends.
Chris, if we could just zoom in a little bit on some specific areas in Illinois, the Chicago region and some of the collar counties there. You know, as we look at this conversion of ag land layer, we obviously have, you know, a lot of conversion taking place in some of the collar counties. And what I really want to also point out is where we start to see a lot of these corridors, and we see this nationally, but also really specifically here, you know, in this area where areas are starting to merge together. and development is taking place. And the loss of this farmland is also taking place. And as you can see in the previous maps that Chris went through, you know, a lot of this area is nationally significant land as well. Beth, if you'll, yeah, after we take a look at this area, so we can see this nationally significant land layer, and we'll kind of zoom down to the southwest part of the state in the Metro East St. Louis area, just on the east side of the river in St. Louis. We can see the same thing kind of taking place in that part of the state, where we've got conversion taking place in the Madison, St. Clair counties areas. And then where I want to kind of finish on is here as we take a look at some of our smaller municipalities or smaller, you know, cities here in central Illinois, the Peoria, Bloomington, Normal, Champaign, Decatur, Sangamon County region, where we really have a very high proportion of our great cropland or nationally significant land as well. And we can see that those areas are developing at a high rate as well. And we hope to, you know, further analyze, you know, these areas in the coming years and take a look at some of these hot spots that are in central Illinois. Chris, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, great, thank you. Before we move on to the policy section, we're actually going to stop and launch a poll here because we are interested in what all of you think will drive the conversion of farmland in Illinois over the next 10 to 20 years. We ask it now because as we start talking about policy responses, it's important to be thinking about those policy responses in terms of what the drivers of conversion are going to be, because they may be then different policy responses. So you see here the ones that we think are probably the biggest drivers. If there's something on here that you think is a bigger driver, feel free to write it in your question panel. If you are having a tough time voting, it may be because you're in full screen mode, which you have to go out of in order to be able to vote and then go back into it. So we'll stop for a minute and let people vote. Okay, Beth, what are we seeing here? All right, so I will say we have now done a number of these webinars in a number of states around the country, and in all of the regions of the country. The top two have been the ones that are the top two here. So again, everyone is concerned about continued, particularly poorly planned development, especially on the commercial, industrial, residential front, but that everybody feels the generational transfer of land poses potentially a unique challenge at this point in time, and ones that we really need to focus on in terms of policies. So that is helpful. Thank you for doing that. And now we are going to turn to the policy scorecard. Our intention with this scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address the three traditional drivers of agricultural land conversion. So that's poorly planned development. We think that has also been weak agricultural viability, because again, the best way to keep farmland and farming is to keep farmers on the land and have profitable businesses. And the third is the fact that land is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. So While AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development since our founding, this is our first effort at a comprehensive state policy scorecard. We know that there are many ways that states can support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all, because we appreciate that there are marketing programs, there are economic development programs, there are grants, there are loans, there's many different ways that states, there's extension. There are many different ways that states support the business of agriculture. What we focused on are 6 specific types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land and address one or more of these conversion drivers. So the 6 policies and programs that we looked at, and you can see here on this list here: purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, PACE, or otherwise known as purchase of development rights programs, or PVR programs. We see these voluntary programs not just as a means to protect land in perpetuity for future generations, but as important economic development and generational transfer tools. Because the sale of an easement can transform part of an illiquid asset, being land, into cash, these programs allow farmers and landowners to improve or expand their farm businesses, or to fund retirement without having to sell land for development. And protected land is typically more affordable for a younger producer. But we appreciate that these are a tool that works primarily in places with development pressure. We looked at land use planning and growth management. These are policies that manage growth and stabilize the land base. Most states, including Illinois, delegate planning authority to local governments, and planning and zoning decisions, we know, are driven largely at the county and municipal level. And local governments must be equipped with a suite of effective tools to support compact development and retain the agricultural land base. What we looked at, though, is that the role that states can play in guiding planning and supporting local governments with the right tools and incentives to stabilize the agricultural land base. We looked at property tax relief. These are programs that reduce property taxes paid on agricultural land in recognition that working lands require far less in municipal services than the taxes typically levied on them. These programs are often called current use or use value assessment. We looked at agricultural district programs that Illinois, along with 17 other states, have that encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. Protection and incentives provided to farmers in these districts vary by state. Some states limit annexation in districts, while others limit use of eminent domain and offer protection from the siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Some offer tax incentives, and some require district enrollment to participate in state PACE programs. We then looked at 2 last programs and policies focused particularly on that land access and generational transfer piece. These are farm link programs that connect farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to remain in agriculture. These can be administered by public or private entities and offer a range of services and resources, from online real estate postings to technical assistance, training, and educational resources. And again, here we included only state-supported programs. And then lastly, we looked at policies around state leasing, so those that make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Sometimes that is their primary purpose, but more often agricultural use of state-owned land is secondary to generating income for a different public purpose or protecting wildlife habitat. So as we look at how Illinois scores here, and Beth will scroll down, it's important to keep in mind that we don't expect all states to have the same level of policy response. Some states, like those on the East and West Coast, have been dealing with significant development pressure for 50 years. Others, like Illinois, are now feeling that development pressure more intensely. But as Illinois' hotspots of conversion continue to grow, so does the need for thoughtful state and local policies that become all the more important. So overall, you see that Illinois gets some points for its planning, property tax, and state leasing policies, and gets a good score for its agricultural districts. And now we're just going to take a little bit of time to look through these a little bit more closely. So you go to this select policy or program, and we're going to go to land use planning. And as Beth does this, Beth, if you can also go down to the bottom so people see how we scored it. And this gives you a sense of what goes into each of those numbers above. And there is actually much more information available that we'll talk about a little bit later. But looking through that land use planning score, Illinois gets points for authorizing local comprehensive plans, but it doesn't require them. And higher scoring states in this category provide support to local governments around comprehensive planning and or to develop farmland protection plans and strategies specifically. Some states have state goals around retaining their farmland and or promoting compact development, and then incentivize or require consistency between those state goals and local planning efforts. So now we're going to go to property tax relief. Here, Illinois is on the lower end of the spectrum, but does get points for recognizing land in filter strips as eligible within its current use program. States that scored higher in this category have withdrawal penalties for land taken out of current use within a certain time frame. Some states use those withdrawal penalties to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements. And it appears that Illinois does not track at the state level the amount of land enrolled in current use. Some states do that. We tend to think that it is a useful way of monitoring enrollment to have that information tracked, not just at the county level, but at the state level. So let's go to ag districts. Illinois' agricultural areas gets points here for requiring that land remain in agricultural use, for limiting special assessments on land in districts, and for its basic infrastructure and being coordinated with local planning bodies. But where you can see that relative to other states, if you go over to the percent of agricultural land enrolled, you see that there's just a 3. So it's very compared to those states that have ag district programs, the amount of land enrolled in Illinois' program is small comparatively. It also seems that unlike other states, being in a district in Illinois or an agricultural area does not prohibit annexation or provide additional protections against eminent domain. So lastly, let's look at state leasing. And here, Illinois does get points for having a formal process for state leasing. That process is run by the Department of Natural Resources. It seems focused primarily on natural resources and creating, in particular, wildlife habitat opportunities. States that score high in this category have inventoried state-owned land that is beyond just that land that is managed by natural resources agencies. And some have used this inventory process and then used a look at state-owned land to provide land access opportunities, especially for new and beginning farmers. So let's take a minute just to talk about the 2 policies here that Illinois doesn't have. So it may be that a state PACE program is difficult to envision creating at this point in time, though there are 28 states that have them. We do note that Kane County has had a PACE program since 2001, and as of 2016 had permanently protected over 4,600 acres using federal funding as a matching source. And I want to talk for a minute about those potential federal funding sources for farmland protection. USDA's Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the Agricultural Lands Easement or ALE section of that, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or CPP, both which are administered by NRCS. Both provide at least a one-to-one match, so a good return on investment for taxpayers in Illinois. And we know that there are some partners on the phone who are making use of these programs. We hope that the increased funding for both ACEP and RCPP in the 2018 Farm Bill, along with some key statutory changes to both programs, will allow them to be more fully utilized in Illinois. And we will be having further conversations about those programs through the National Agricultural Land Network over the summer and into the fall, and we hope many people will join us for that. Just lastly, to touch on FarmLink, this looming transfer of millions of acres of farmland and ranchland, and what you all see as this generational transfer challenge means that these tools are particularly important. We don't necessarily think that a FarmLink program needs to be a public program. However, public funding for these types of efforts tends to make them more secure. Other tools around generational transfer include beginning farmer tax credits. We hope to actually, in our next version of the scorecard, speak more to those programs. Again, states like Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska have had these tax credits for a while. As a way to incentivize the lease and in some cases the sale to beginning and historically disadvantaged farmers. So I think that I will stop there. I hope it was helpful cruise through the findings. If you do have questions, please write them down now. And as we go out of the website, we're going to launch a poll which asks which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Illinois. And my apologies, we only had 5 slots. I wish that we had had room to put in state leasing and or FarmLink. If you feel that those are the most important or very important, please feel free to write them in on the question line. And we'll take a minute, and you can, again, vote for more than one if you want. So we'll take a minute for the results. Okay, what are we seeing here, Beth? All right, top vote getters of thinking about PACE and how to do more with a PACE program or programs in Illinois, followed by land use planning, and then property tax relief. This is very useful to know. And I will say that the National Ag Land Network will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in the early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about specific policy elements to do that. Our intent is to focus a webinar on each of these types of policies and to look at what makes for an effective program, to talk to those folks who are in the top scoring states in each one of these categories to understand how they've done what they've done and what they think has been most important. So we hope that you all will join us for those webinars that, again, will start in the early fall. So going back to the PowerPoint, one thing missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land. And that's because there's not a national comprehensive data layer focused on permanently protected agricultural land. We are building this new database now. If you have not heard from us and you are an entity that holds agricultural conservation easements, please let us know that by adding a comment in the question panel, because we will be back in touch. I do see a little bit of green. It looks up there, it might be the Kane County program. If there are others, though, with easements, please do let us know, because we don't want to leave any land out of the database. So I think with that, Chris, I'm going to pause and let's see if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So yeah, we've got a few questions coming in. Start off with the question, why is there more nationally significant land in Illinois than land that is considered the state's best land?
Right. Well, yeah, it gets a little confusing. I mean, the great thing for Illinois is because Illinois is a state with a very large percent of nationally significant land. So the way that we calculated it is that we gave every acre of agricultural land a PVR value. That value then became the basis for scoring the state's better lands or best lands. And the way we did that was we took the median PVR value and said that everything above that median is the state's best land. So in Illinois, and so then for the nationally significant land, we took everything above a certain range of the PVR values and decided that those were nationally significant. So in Illinois, because there is more than half of the agricultural land in the state is nationally significant, the better half of Illinois land is the sort of upper tier of the nationally significant land even. That's why. I hope that explained it well.
Yeah, we've got another time for maybe a couple more questions here. We've got another one coming in. Can the PVR value be used in place of LESA scores used in zoning consideration for protecting farmland?
Oh boy. You know, I'm not sure that I'm equipped to answer that. In fact, I know I'm not equipped to answer that. So unless you are, Chris, it would just be conjecture on my part. And I think that what we should do is be back in touch with that questioner with an answer. And that does remind me that the most common of the questions will be, we are creating a frequently asked questions document that we will send out to everybody who has listened in on a webinar. But I think that we could get an answer specifically for the person who asked that question. So we'll be in touch with that answer.
Okay, great. And I'll just encourage everybody to continue submitting questions, and we will, if we don't get to them today, we'll do our best to get you the answers after the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, and we'll continue with the presentation. So I just want to mention, that, time is really not on our side in saving our farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protecting farmland by the year 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day down to 500 acres a day by 2040. You can see here some of the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection. First of which is establishing the National Ag Land Network, and Chris will talk a little bit more about the network here in a minute. We have a consultant, Brian Bordage, that's helping us to launch the network here in the Midwest. This will allow us to do more capacity building and peer-to-peer learning for organizations who are or want to be taking an active role in protecting farmland. Also, we want to provide new leadership in key locations. We're increasing our staff capacity in the Midwest to focus on farmland protection policy and education, as well as farm transfer and succession. We also want to protect more farmland ourselves and with partners. In Illinois, we're hoping to partner with other land trusts that want help with complex projects. AFT is currently partnering with the Conservation Fund and several other partners on a recently approved Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP project, aimed to increase ag conservation easements in Illinois. We also want to advocate for stronger state and federal policies. Enacting farmland protection policies at any level requires bipartisan coalition and active community engagement. In Illinois, we will keep building awareness about this issue, laying the foundation of community support that will be essential to any future policy action. Finally, promote research-based decision-making. We want to use the findings from the Farms Under Threat research to guide our activities on the ground, and we are on the lookout for opportunities to build on this research and learn more about what's happening to farmland on the local level. And here are some ways that we think Illinois could do more. Analyze and map ag land trends and conditions. Every state needs to have a way to track its agricultural land trends, and ideally should have a goal specific to retaining its agricultural land base. We also want to strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. We have found for this project that the states with the most effective policy responses are those that have a coordinated suite of policies and not just one. We think there could be value in considering opportunities to expand the Ag District program to increase support and protection for farmers and farmland. We also want to support farm viability and access to land. Finding ways to facilitate the transfer of land to the next generation of farmers is key, as is support for farm transfer and succession. Access to land is also particularly challenging to socially disadvantaged as well as first-generation farmers. And Illinois has 4 times as many producers over the age of 65 as under the age of 35. Some other Midwest states have used beginning farmer tax credits effectively, such as Iowa and Minnesota. But focusing on farm linking and state leasing could also help. We also want to plan for agriculture and not just around it. Agriculture is often included as an afterthought in state and local planning. Planning for agriculture means thinking proactively about how agriculture fits into economic development plans, emergency preparedness plans, as well as land use planning. But we also want to focus on saving the best and not forgetting the rest. AFT believes that all farmland has value and produces important co-benefits, but we believe the nationally significant land, because of its resiliency and ability to produce with few limitations, needs to be afforded a higher status in state and federal policy. And Chris, I think we've got a few minutes left for some more questions.
Yes, and so I'm looking at a couple of them. One is very easy. Will today's participants be invited or notified of the webinars this fall? The answer is yes, but I would make a plug for folks signing up to be members of the National Agricultural Land Network. Again, we'll get to that in a minute because that's one surefire way that you will get notice. We have a question here that is, what are the best examples of statewide FarmLink programs and how significant is farm succession planning in their work? I'm going to focus here only on the statewide FarmLink programs that we did in this report, that we looked at in this report, and you can go to that drop-down menu and go to FarmLink, and you'll see the programs that show up at the top of the list. The ones in the top 5 vote getters were New York, Connecticut, Iowa, North Carolina, New Jersey, and I mentioned Virginia, which is number 6 on the list, because they are focusing a lot on succession as a part of their farm linking efforts. We know that because as part of the webinar a few days ago, they talked about that specifically. I will say that in New York, they have a system where the state funds regional farmland navigators. They both have an online listing and they focus on doing some matching and have people on the ground to be helping to match, again, those folks who are seeking land and those who are looking for somebody to purchase a property or to lease a property. But I think you can go, again, two things. One, we will focus on farm linking again in the fall as part of one of the policy webinars, but take a look again at the votes and how those states are doing on the farm link piece of the scorecard. And then lastly, well, I'm looking here at other ones. There's an email that, there's a question that says it's focused on land use planning, and have we evaluated Illinois counties that don't have zoning versus counties that do have zoning? That, to the best of my knowledge, Chris, is not something that AFT has looked at in Illinois, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think that the way to answer that, and then the second half of that question, has there been any distinction between municipalities that list protecting farmland in their long-range plans, but do not tie the plan to an actual ordinance, which obviously you would want to see some consistency between the long-range plans and the zoning. We are focusing more on those municipal zoning tools based in part on the feedback that we have gotten through this webinar series of the importance of those tools and the number of folks who are interested in learning more about both local planning and local zoning. So that is again going to be a focus that we will be putting more resources to. We have done some, there's some that you can find on our Farmland Information Center website that talks about zoning and planning tools, but it is an area that we are going to put some more emphasis to going forward. Oh, wait a minute. Here this is, I think, sent in from somebody from NRCS. The federal FPPA in Illinois, so that's the Federal Farmland Protection Policy Act, uses productivity index from the University of Illinois, prime farmland rating. This is used for LISA. Individual counties may have their own LISA that weighs the soil slightly differently, but the overall ranking should be similar to the state ranking. So my guess is that, again, that it sounds that LISA then is pretty close to the land capability classes, and our PVR values are pretty close, but not completely overlapping with land capability classes. So it sounds like those are pretty similar between the two. Let me raise one last question. Does AFT have a plan for working with Black and Brown and Indigenous farmers in farmland protection? And the answer to that is we recognize that we need to do more in this regard. We are very focused on farmland access and particularly focused on expanding that land access for communities that have had fewer opportunities than others. We welcome any suggestions on ways that we can do more. There are places where we work where we are doing quite a bit. That is particularly in California, in parts of New England, but again, we are interested in trying to serve underserved communities more with respect to land access opportunities. So would welcome thoughts from partners on how best we can do that. And one last question or a comment. And Chris, maybe you can comment on this. This comment is, I'm concerned that equestrian properties aren't considered agriculture to be protected. We are losing places to be able to keep horses, so the LDR category is actually relevant to those who keep livestock on a small scale and do small scale farming. I think your content is missing a part of what agriculture is today, not just 40-acre agriculture production properties need protection. Do you want to offer any thoughts on that?
Well, I think this study does, take those areas into consideration. When you look at, these low density residential areas that, maybe equestrian farms. I think what the research is showing is that those low density residential areas are many times more likely to be converted to urban areas or UHD areas. And so I think the study does look at that. It does consider, it is able to break down between cropland, pasture land, and forest land. But we'd be happy to follow up on that question and do a little more research on that as well.
Great, thank you. So let's go to on this last slide. Let's talk for a minute. Let me talk a little bit more about the Farmland Information Center and the National Agricultural Land Network. And as we start to talk about that, we're going to launch our last poll because both the Farmland Information Center and the network are gearing up the type and amount of technical assistance that we are making available to partners in agricultural land protection and planning. And as we do so, it will be very valuable for us to know what partners feel is the most important or type of technical assistance for you all. And therefore, if you see that there's something not listed here that you think is actually a higher priority, feel free to write it in on that question panel. But these are amongst the things that we are planning to focus additional technical assistance going forward. And again, you can vote for more than one. Okay. Oh, good. People want all types of technical assistance. But I see that there's a high level of interest, particularly around land transfer and access. We do have quite a bit of resources available around that, and we have had a project that has been training land access trainers, and we have a whole curriculum around that. Some of which can be found on our farmlandinfo.org website. But let me go back then and explain about the Farmland Information Center and the network. So the Farmland Information Center is a clearinghouse of information about agricultural land, primarily focused on agricultural land protection, but it's protection and retention, and there are now significant resources around farm transfer and succession. This is a collaboration that we've had with NRCS for decades. It is web-based, but there is a technical assistance hotline, which is that number there. So you are welcome to call it. People do answer the phone. You can also go to the website, which is farmlandinfo.org, and there's a button that is Ask an Expert, which again allows you to write in questions that you have. The great thing about it is that it's resources that are both for farmers, landowners, and practitioners who are engaged in agricultural land protection, retention, and planning. For landowners, if they're interested in understanding what it means to protect land permanently, there are resources and fact sheets about what is a conservation easement, what is an agricultural conservation easement. There is fact sheets around the agricultural conservation easement program that might be useful for landowners thinking about using that as a source of protection funding. And there is also a farmland protection directory, so that if there's a landowner who's wondering, where do I go to find somebody with whom I can work to permanently protect their land, that is a place for them. And for practitioners, the information and the assistance available could go anything. So the question about what do you consider to be the best state farm linking programs, we can give you additional information through the FIC about why we consider particular programs so terrific, what the New York program looks like, what the Virginia program looks like. That kind of information is what is available through the Farmland Information Center, as well as a great number of statistics and technical reports that make the case for saving farmland. The National Agricultural Land Network is something newly launched. I am directing it. It is focused on building the collective capacity of practitioners and professionals engaged in planning and agricultural land protection. We will have a lot of programming that runs the gamut from the sort of basic, what does it mean to have a good agricultural conservation easement? What are the key components? How do you find funding for easements? From there up to conversations around what are ways that we can combine agricultural land protection with land access opportunities. Where are the land access needs around the country? What are the ways of incorporating and thinking about working with landowners on soil health while you're also thinking about working with them around agricultural land protection? So we hope the network will be helpful. We will be focused on planning tools, as the one questioner asked about what are some of those tools, and we'll have some programming around those at the local level as well. So for those who are interested, please feel free to sign up. You can go to farmland.org, NALN. You can write me an email if you're interested or have questions. And again, our next programming is largely going to be these policy webinars that we will let people know about beginning in the early fall. And with that, Chris, let me close and turn it over to you for any last thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. And I just want to thank all of our attendees. Hopefully we can continue to work together on farmland protection efforts here in Illinois. And please feel free to follow up with us if you have any additional questions, and we'll try to get back to you on the other questions that were posed today. So thank you again, and everybody have a great rest of your week. Take care.